I have logged over 100,000 standard solar cycles as the Chief of Security for Epsilon 7 Station. My name is Zorgon, and I am, by birth and by training, a Praxian. My species is defined by logic, by strength, by the elegant superiority of our biology. My four multi-jointed arms can apply precise pressure to recalibrate a fibrillating power conduit or crush the hardened carapace of a Clithian marauder with equal ease. My compound eyes, faceted and hypersensitive, can track 1,000 moving variables on a tactical display, while simultaneously detecting the subtle shift in atmospheric pressure that precedes a hull breach. My own chitinous plating can deflect low-grade kinetic rounds. I am, in every quantifiable metric, an exemplar of galactic security competence. I have faced down void wraiths in the nebulae of Cathar, out-negotiated Vexian pirate kings, and purged parasitic nanoswarms from 3 separate star systems. I tell you this not as a boast, but as a baseline, a control variable against which all other data points must be measured. And I tell you this because, despite all my training, all my experience, and all my biological advantages, the single greatest threat I ever witnessed on my station was a small, soft-skinned primate, armed with a piece of corroded plumbing. I have seen 1,000 threats neutralized, their energy signatures fading from my tactical boards, their biosigns winking out into nothingness. But none haunt the deepest recesses of my memory. None cause my sensory stalks to retract in involuntary trepidation, like the memory of the human and her rusty pipe. It began, as most galactic-level follies do, with a directive from the Alliance Council, the Interspecies Integration and Cooperation Initiative, a political maneuver wrapped in the saccharine language of unity. As a Tier 1 strategic outpost, Epsilon 7 was mandated to accept a representative from a newly inducted species, humanity. Her name was Eva Rostova. My initial assessment, logged in my private archives, used the words suboptimal, disappointing, and statistically indefensible. She was small, barely reaching the lowest joint of my primary arms. Her skin was a fragile pinkish membrane, utterly devoid of natural armor. 2 arms, 2 legs, a bipedal gait that seemed woefully unstable. Her physical readouts were, to be blunt, insulting. A strength index of 0.8 on the galactic scale. A dermal resistance rating of 0.2. For context, a juvenile Groxian hatchling, still soft from its egg, rates a 1.5 in both categories. We assigned her to my division, security. It was a cruel joke played by some administrator light years away. When she arrived, she carried no standard-issue phase pulse carbine, no personal energy shield generator. Her gear, as she called it, was contained in a worn satchel of some synthetic fabric. My second-in-command, Cathar, a fellow Praxian of considerable size and even more considerable arrogance, made a show of scanning it with a handheld diagnostic tool. His mandibles clicked in open derision. The contents were laughable. A small hinged metal device with multiple folding appendages, a multi-tool, she'd called it, a roll of fibrous adhesive strips, a filtration straw for purifying water, a solid-state data slate that looked at least 5 generations out of date. Cathar turned to the other guards, a mix of Praxians and hulking Clithians, and chittered, "The primate has brought us artifacts for a museum." They echoed his amusement with guttural rumbles and clicks. They saw a liability, a political token. I saw a walking, talking violation of every security protocol I held sacred. Epsilon 7 was a fortress of modern technology. Our corridors were patrolled by drones and monitored by systems that could detect a single misplaced molecule. Our guards were armed with weapons that could slice through a meter of reinforced durasteel. And into this fortress, the Alliance had sent a creature equipped for, what? A camping trip? My duty compelled me to process her, to integrate her into my command structure. I called her into my primary office, a sterile sphere of chrome and holographic light. She stood in the center of the room, looking small and utterly out of place. Her file glowed on my main display. Designation: human. Species: name Homo sapiens. Origin: Sol 3, Earth. There was an attached addendum, a single line flagged with a low priority warning. Planet of origin classified as a Class 12 death world. The term was a piece of bureaucratic jargon, a footnote. In my arrogance, I dismissed it. What was a death world to a station like Epsilon 7? We were a perfectly controlled environment. Gravity was a stable one. Charo. The air was filtered to 99.999% purity. The greatest danger was a replicator malfunction that might produce lukewarm nutrient paste. The concept of a world with crushing gravity, a chaotic atmosphere, rampant predators, and a biosphere laced with poisons was abstract. It was a horror story told to frighten hatchlings, not a serious tactical consideration. My compound eyes focused on her. Specialist Rostova, I began, my voice modulator set to a formal, commanding tone. Your dossier is sparse, and your loadout is non-compliant. Where is your standard issue energy sidearm and shield emitter? She gave a small shrug, a gesture my translator flagged as indicating indifference or helplessness. She patted the worn satchel at her hip. Everything I need is in here, Commander. Then she did it. The thing that my threat analysis software, even now, cannot properly categorize. Her lips, thin and soft, pulled back from her teeth. A bearing of ivory-colored enamel. My analytical mind processed the data. A primate threat display, similar to that of the snarling Grolnax of Cygnus X1. But my instincts, the ancient ones buried beneath millennia of Praxian logic, screamed a different interpretation. This wasn't a threat. It was something far more unnerving. It was amusement. She was entertained by my question, as if I, a Praxian commander with 4 arms and a century of experience, had asked something profoundly foolish. Cathar, who stood by the door, did not catch this nuance. He saw only weakness. He let out a low series of clicks, the Praxian equivalent of a snort. Perhaps she intends to bore our enemies into submission, Commander, he transmitted over our private channel. The other sentries on duty, monitoring the exchange, signaled their agreement. I made a decision. I could not, in good conscience, place her on any active patrol. She was a hazard not only to herself, but to any partner I might assign her. Specialist, I said, my tone final. Your assignment will be Sub-Level 12. You will monitor the maintenance conduits, refuse processing, and tertiary life support systems. It was the most demeaning post on the station. It was a solitary, silent watch over the station's guts, a maze of pipes, conduits, and humming machinery that had been fully automated for centuries. It was a place for rejects and broken droids, an insult wrapped in the guise of an official order. I expected protest. I expected an appeal to the Alliance liaison. Instead, she just nodded. That unsettling smile touched her lips again. Sounds cozy, she said. The word cozy was not in my tactical lexicon. My translator offered a definition, giving a feeling of comfort, warmth, and relaxation. The idea of finding comfort in the grimy, echoing depths of a station's maintenance level was so alien, so illogical, that for a moment my processor stalled. She turned and walked out, leaving me in a state of profound confusion. I had intended to put her in her place. Instead, I felt as if I had just failed to comprehend the first move in a game I didn't even know I was playing. For several standard solar cycles, Specialist Rostova became a phantom, a name on a duty roster, a single green biosign icon moving slowly through the labyrinthine schematics of Sub-Level 12 on my master display. She never filed a complaint. She never requested a transfer. She simply did her job, a job that consisted of nothing. The systems she was meant to monitor were self-regulating. Any deviation would have triggered 1,000 alarms in my own command center long before a biological entity could notice. Yet, I would occasionally pull up the low-resolution feeds from that sector out of a strange, nagging curiosity. I would watch her. She wasn't idle. She moved with a quiet purpose. I saw her place a hand on a massive coolant pipe, her head tilted as if listening to its thrumming heartbeat. I saw her tapping on pressure gauges that were nothing more than decorative relics from a bygone era of manual control. She would run a hand along a weld seam on a plasma conduit, her expression thoughtful. It was bizarre, inefficient, utterly pointless behavior. It was the activity of a primitive trying to comprehend a system far beyond its understanding by using its most basic senses. Cathar once noted, "She is like a hatchling poking at a fusion reactor. She does not understand the power she is near." We all agreed. We were wrong. We were so profoundly, catastrophically wrong. The alarm that shattered the station's mundane routine was not a drill. It was a high-frequency shriek that bypassed all our standard alert tones, a priority zero threat notification reserved for an imminent station-wide catastrophe. On the main view screen, the void flashed. A vessel, jagged and dark like a shard of obsidian, had decloaked less than a kilometer from our hull. It bore no registry, no transponder signal, but I knew the profile. The biomechanical asymmetry, the pulsating malevolent energy signature. It was a Scourge raiding vessel. My 4 hearts, which normally beat in a calm, asynchronous rhythm, clenched into a single, frantic pulse. The Scourge. They were the ghouls of the Outer Rim, not conquerors, but butchers. A swarm of cybernetically augmented locusts who stripped ships and stations down to their component atoms, harvesting technology and biology with equal, pitiless efficiency. They were infamous for their ability to generate localized quantum fields that allowed them to bypass most conventional energy shielding. Protocols, I thought, my training kicking in. I barked orders. Lock down all primary sectors. Seal the command deck. I want kill zones established at junctions Alpha, Gamma, and Delta. Full power to internal defense grids. My team moved with practiced precision, their chitinous limbs a blur of motion over their consoles. Our strategy was sound, containment. Let them board in a controlled area and annihilate them with overwhelming firepower. Our phase pulse carbines, drawing directly from the station's main reactor, could fire indefinitely and would turn a Scourge warrior into superheated gas in seconds. But the Scourge were not predictable. They did not target the command deck, a foolish frontal assault. They did not aim for the armory or the reactor core, the obvious strategic assets. Their initial salvo, a series of pinpoint energy lances, struck the lower hemisphere of Epsilon 7. They hit the main power conduits, the ones that ran directly through sublevel 12. The lights on my command deck flickered, dimmed, and then died, plunging us into the terrifying blood-red glow of emergency lighting. A cascade of failure warnings flooded my console. Main power, offline. Internal defense grids, offline. Hard light barriers, offline. We were on minimal emergency backup, life support, the command deck, and a few pathetic lumens of light in the main corridors. That was all. My guards' powerful phase pulse carbines were now just inert, heavy clubs. Their internal power cells held a charge for perhaps 3 shots. We were reduced to our kinetic sidearms, small caliber projectile weapons, almost useless against the Scourge's ablative armor. A new alert blared, multiple hull breaches. The Scourge were boarding. They were pouring in through the maintenance hatches and service tunnels on sublevel 12. Exactly where we had exiled the human. Panic is not a Praxian trait. We are conditioned from the egg to suppress it, to replace it with cold, hard logic. But as the red emergency lights painted my command center in the color of shed blood, I felt a cold tendril of something akin to fear coiling in my primary stomach. We were blind, crippled, and facing one of the galaxy's most feared predators on their own terms. My tactical display was a nightmare of flashing red icons, swarming through the lower decks. My teams were falling back, their kinetic rounds sparking uselessly off the enemy's armored hides. "Commander!" Cathar's voice was tight, strained. "We have no contact with sectors 9 through 14. The Scourge have severed all communication relays." And in the middle of that chaos, in the heart of the invasion, was the human. Eva Rostova, a soft, fragile creature with a strength index of 0.8. I tried to raise her on the dedicated security channel, a fool's errand. "Specialist Rostova, respond. What is your status?" The only reply was a hiss of angry static. Cathar moved to my side, his secondary arms gesturing to the tactical map, where Rostova's single green bio sign was now surrounded by a sea of red. "She is lost, Commander," he said, his tone grim, but with an undercurrent of, "I told you so." A casualty of her own inadequacy. She never stood a chance. He was correct. The logic was unassailable. A single, unarmed, soft-skinned primitive against a squad of Scourge warriors. The outcome was a predetermined mathematical certainty. A gruesome one. I was about to mark her as lost in action on the roster, a minor footnote in a major disaster. Then, a crackle. A voice cutting through the static. It was faint, but it was clear, and it was terrifyingly calm. "Commander Zorgon, you read me?" It was her, Rostova. Her voice was not filled with panic or screams for help. It sounded conversational, almost casual, as if she were reporting a minor fluid leak. My 4 hands froze above my console. Cathar's mandibles, which had been clicking with grim certainty, fell slack. "Rostova, report your situation immediately. What is your status?" "Well," she replied, and I could hear the strange, airy quality of a person breathing hard, but controlling it. "I have a problem, but I also think I have a solution. The new neighbors are rude as hell, and they've cut the lights." A problem. The Scourge were a problem. "Specialist, give me a tactical report. Now," I bellowed, my patience gone. "Right, tactical. Hostiles are using the maintenance causeways to bypass your choke points. Smart. But I've located the manual override for the primary plasma conduits. The problem is, the control lever is sheared off. Looks like it took a hit from their boarding charge." There was a pause. I heard a grunt of effort over the comm, then the screech of protesting metal. "Never mind," she said, her voice slightly strained. "Found a substitute." At that moment, a single emergency camera on sub-level 12 flickered to life, its power source rerouted by some local surge. The image was grainy, washed out in the red emergency glow. But I could see her. She was standing before a massive control console, sparks showering from a damaged panel nearby. And in her hands, she held a length of metal. It was thick, long, and covered in the unmistakable reddish-brown corrosion of oxidized iron, a section of discarded ancient support pipe. She was going to face the Scourge with a piece of garbage. My mind simply refused to process what I was seeing. The utter absurdity of the situation was a physical weight in my command center. My entire security force, armed with the pinnacle of Praxian military engineering, was being systematically dismantled. And our only potential asset in the heart of the infestation was a diminutive primate holding a piece of rusted scrap. "A substitute for what, Specialist Rostova?" I demanded, my voice betraying the bewilderment that was threatening to overwhelm my tactical discipline. "What are you doing with that object?" My mind raced, pulling up the deep-level schematics of the station, diagrams I hadn't looked at in decades. The manual override for the plasma conduits? It was a tertiary failsafe, a system of last resort designed to prevent a catastrophic core breach by venting superheated plasma directly into the void of space. Activating it required a specialized tri-latch torque wrench, an immense amount of rotational force, and the simultaneous disabling of 3 separate safety interlocks. It was designed to be difficult to use, to prevent the very thing she was contemplating. "Leverage," she replied, her voice tight with exertion. "The socket for the lever is still intact. Just need to apply about 200 kilonewtons of torque. This pipe should do the trick." Her casual use of precise engineering terms was jarring, a flash of unexpected competence in a sea of madness. Then, the scene on the monitor shifted. From the shadows of an intersecting corridor, a new figure emerged. A Scourge warrior. It was immense, a towering monstrosity of glistening black chitin and whirring servo motors. Its primary arms terminated in crackling energy blades, and its featureless head swiveled, optical sensors glowing a malevolent crimson as it fixed on the human. My 4 hearts seized in my chest cavity. This was it. I was about to witness the statistically inevitable outcome. Cathar let out a low growl, a sound of grim final satisfaction. The liability was about to be neutralized. But Rostova didn't scream. She didn't run. She didn't even turn to face the monster that was now stalking toward her. Instead, she jammed the end of the rusty pipe into the hexagonal socket on the control console. The fit was clumsy, imperfect. The Scourge raised its blade arms, preparing for a lunge that would cleave her in 2. "Hey, ugly!" she panted, the words directed not at me, but at the creature. The sound of her voice made the Scourge pause for a fraction of a second, its programming likely struggling to categorize this tiny, defiant creature. "You ever heard of physics?" she asked. In that split second, I realized my error. I thought she was trying to turn the valve. I thought her plan was to vent the plasma, a suicidal move. I was wrong. She wasn't using the pipe to turn the valve. She was using the valve to anchor the pipe. As the Scourge finally lunged, its massive form a blur of speed, she didn't try to dodge. She kicked off the bulkhead beside her, throwing her entire body weight, all of her insignificant mass downwards onto the pipe. The pipe, wedged in the immovable socket, became a pivot po a fulcrum. She used it to swing her entire body in a sudden, violent arc, parallel to the floor. The Scourge's lunge, aimed at where she had been standing, met only empty air. Its crackling energy blades, intended for her soft flesh, plunged deep into the control console with a blinding flash and a shower of molten metal. The creature was stuck. Its primary weapons, its tools of butchery, were now embedded in the very machinery it had sought to disable. The sheer, unadulterated genius of the maneuver was breathtaking. It wasn't a move from any combat manual. It was the kind of improvisation born from desperation and a profound, intuitive understanding of the physical world. It was the logic of a death world. On the command deck of Epsilon 7, a place of supreme order and technological might, there was a silence so profound it felt like the station itself was holding its breath. My secondary eyes were locked on the grainy monitor, while my primary eyes scanned the tactical display, trying to reconcile the data with the visual reality. It was impossible. The data said 0.8 strength index. The reality showed something else. The Scourge roared, a sound of synthesized fury and mechanical frustration, as it struggled to wrench its energy blades from the mangled console. It was a creature of pure aggression, its programming ill-equipped for such a scenario. It expected fear, flight, or futile resistance. It did not expect to be outthought by its prey. Rostova didn't give it time to adapt. She landed from her swing in a low crouch, and then, with a sharp grunt, she yanked the rusty pipe free from the override socket. I watched, my logic processors burning with overload, as she held the piece of industrial refuse in a two-handed grip, balancing its weight. It was no longer a tool for leverage. It was now a weapon, a primitive, brutal, and terrifyingly effective one. A mace, a war club. The Scourge finally tore its blades loose with a screech of tortured metal and turned on her, its crimson optics burning with murderous intent. It was faster, stronger, and built for killing. It should have been over in a nanosecond. But Rostova moved first. She didn't move with the fluid dance-like grace of a Clithian blade master or the overwhelming four-armed assault of a Praxian warrior. Her movements were short, sharp, and brutally efficient. There was no wasted energy. It was the economy of motion of a creature that has learned that survival is measured in millimeters and microseconds. She lunged forward, not away. While the Scourge was still reorienting, she swung the heavy pipe in a low, horizontal arc. It connected with the Scourge's primary leg, Joe. The sound, even over the low-fidelity comm, was unmistakable, a sickening, wet crack of shattering chitin and pulverized mechanics. The creature's leg buckled. It stumbled, its towering frame suddenly unstable. It let out another roar, this one tinged with the electronic shriek of pain and system damage. Before it could recover, she swung again. This time, an upward diagonal blow that smashed directly into the side of its head. The impact sent the monster reeling sideways. I saw its optical sensors flicker. She was a blur of controlled, violent action. She wasn't just fighting it, she was systematically dismantling it. She was using its own mass and momentum against it, forcing it off balance. She was using the environment she had so meticulously observed. She stamped on a loose floor panel as the creature staggered, causing it to pitch forward. As the Scourge fell to its knees, she was already in motion, stepping in close, past the reach of its flailing blade arms. With the monster on the floor, its systems in chaos, she showed no mercy, no hesitation. She raised the rusty pipe high above her head, both hands gripping it tightly, her small frame coiled like a spring. She brought it down with every ounce of force her Deathworlder muscles could generate. The blow landed squarely on the back of the Scourge's neck, at the junction where the head met the torso, a spot that my tactical readouts now highlighted as a sliver of minimal armor plating, a weak point she couldn't possibly have known about. But she did. There was a sound like a block of ice being shattered by a hammer. The Scourge's crimson optics went dark. Its limbs twitched once, then went still. A trickle of black, viscous fluid leaked from the shattered Joe. On my command deck, the silence was broken by Cathar, who made a soft, choking sound. His mandibles were hanging open, a sign of profound shock and Apraxian. My own sensory stalks had fully retracted into their protective sheaths, an involuntary response to witnessing an event that fundamentally breaks one's understanding of the universe. We had just watched a creature rated at zero point 0.8 strength index methodically and brutally destroy a Scourge battle drone, a being with a strength index of 15.0, using a piece of industrial garbage. Her voice crackled over the comm again, only slightly breathless. Okay, one down. Now, about that plasma conduit. The dead Scourge, a mountain of inert metal and shattered chitin, lay at her feet like a discarded toy. She paid it no mind. Her focus was entirely on the damaged console and the pipe still clutched in her hands. She was a creature of singular, terrifying purpose. She reinserted the pipe into the override socket, her movements now practiced. "Commander," she said, her voice regaining its calm, conversational tone, as if she hadn't just single-handedly dispatched a biomechanical nightmare. "I'm going to vent the primary plasma flow into the maintenance network. Should be hot enough to fry anything with a complex nervous system or cybernetic components between decks 10 and 14. My mind, already reeling, struggled to process this new, insane proposal. "Specialist, that is a negative," I finally managed to broadcast, my voice a dry rasp. "Venting raw plasma into the station's infrastructure will flash boil the entire sector. The thermal expansion will rupture the outer hull. You will destroy 3 decks and compromise the entire station." I was the commander. I was the expert. My logic was sound, my assessment based on every engineering manual and safety protocol ever written for Epsilon 7. She was proposing to burn a hole through my station to solve a problem. It was the equivalent of amputating a limb to cure a minor infection. "Not if I only give it a 3-second burst," she replied, her tone patient, as if explaining a simple concept to a confused child. "And I'm not using the main line. That'd be stupid. I've isolated the pre-ignition feeder loop. It carries a much smaller volume, but the plasma is just as hot. It'll be enough to cook the bad guys, not the station. But you need to cut atmospheric regulators and activate the emergency vacuum seals to that entire sector. Now. Otherwise, the pressure wave from the superheated air will blow out the bulkheads before the heat can dissipate." I stared at the schematic on my display, my mind racing to keep up with her. The pre-ignition feeder loop. It was a redundant system, barely a footnote on the main reactor diagrams. To even know of its existence, let alone how to isolate it and weaponize it, required an intimate, hands-on knowledge of the station's deepest, most forgotten systems. A knowledge she had acquired during her punishment detail. A knowledge she gained by touching the pipes, listening to their flows, observing the relics of old gauges. She hadn't been acting like a primitive. She had been learning the station's language, its true anatomy, while we, with our sophisticated scanners, saw only a surface-level diagram. I looked at the tactical display. The red icons of the Scourge were swarming the exact decks she had named. My security teams were pinned down, taking heavy casualties. Our conventional tactics had failed. We were losing. Logic dictated our doom. But here was a new kind of logic. The logic of the death world, the logic of using the fire to fight the fire. It was insane. It was reckless. It was also our only hope. Cathar looked at me, his compound eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. He simply nodded, a gesture of concession. He was deferring to the human. "Do it," I ordered, the words feeling alien in my own mouth. I turned to my communications officer. "Seal all bulkheads to sectors 10 through 14. Evacuate all atmosphere. Acknowledge." The officer, a junior Praxian, stared at me for a half-second too long before my glare spurred him to action. On the grainy monitor, I saw Rostova brace herself. She planted her feet, leaned her slight frame against the rusty pipe, and gave it a massive, desperate heave. A deep guttural roar echoed through the very structure of the station, a sound of immense power being unleashed. The emergency lights in sub-level 12 flared to an impossible, brilliant white for a single second, overwhelming the camera's sensor, and then died completely, plunging her into darkness. On my main tactical display, the result was instantaneous and absolute. Dozens of Red Scourge biosigns, spread across 3 entire decks, flickered, turned gray, and then vanished, all at once. A silent, electronic genocide. Silence descended, a heavy, ringing silence that was more profound than the cacophony of battle it replaced. The station gave a final, shuddering groan as the immense thermal stress dissipated, and then it was still. On the tactical board, a few remaining Scourge icons, those on the boarding vessel, blinked in confusion before their ship hastily decloaked and vanished into the void, its raiding party crippled, its mission a catastrophic failure. The station was saved. A moment later, the main power grid sputtered back to life. A complex series of automated reroutes and backup generators kicked in, restoring primary functions. The sterile white lights of the command deck returned, chasing away the blood-red emergency glow. It felt like waking from a nightmare. My entire command staff, Praxians and Clithians alike, were frozen. They weren't cheering. They weren't celebrating. They were staring, transfixed, at the main view screen, where the low-resolution feed from sub-level 12 had also been restored. The image was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a few sparking severed cables. But in the gloom, we could see her, Eva Rostova. She was leaning against a bulkhead, her chest rising and falling in deep, measured breaths. At her feet, the rusty pipe lay discarded, its job done. With a slow, deliberate motion, she raised a hand and wiped a smear of black Scourge ichor from her cheek, her pale skin stark against the dark fluid. I keyed my console, opening a private, encrypted channel directly to her. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, stripped of all its previous command and arrogance. "Specialist Rostova, report." For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she slowly lifted her head. She wasn't looking at the camera, not exactly. Her gaze seemed to pierce through the lens, through the light years of fiber optic cable, and meet mine directly. And then she gave that expression, the baring of the teeth, the smile. But this time, I finally truly understood it. It was not a threat display. It was not amusement. It was the calm, terrifying satisfaction of a predator that has successfully defended its territory. The quiet confidence of absolute competence. "Problem solved, Commander," she said, her voice still level, still calm. "The plumbing's a bit messy down here, though. You might want to send a sanitation droid down to clean up the leftovers." She then did something that broke the last vestiges of my Praxian logic. She bent down and picked up the rust-covered pipe. She held it for a moment, her gaze fixed on it. Then she gently patted its side, a gesture of affection. "Good job, Rusty," she murmured, her voice too low for the main comms, but perfectly clear on my private channel. She was talking to the pipe. She had formed a bond with it. She had given a name to a piece of scrap metal she had used to save us all. My processors did not fail this time. They simply shut down that line of inquiry, flagging it with a bright red warning. "Do not attempt to analyze. Incomprehensible variable." This was not a soldier. This was not a technician. This was something else entirely, something ancient and primal, wearing the guise of a small, soft primate. And we had made the catastrophic error of thinking we were the superior beings. In the solar cycles that followed the Scourge incident, a new and unfamiliar quiet settled over the security division of Epsilon 7. The official report, which I co-authored with a panel of Alliance bureaucrats, was a masterpiece of obfuscation. It cited a fortuitous and catastrophic power surge within the station's secondary systems that just so happened to coincide with the Scourge invasion, neutralizing the borders. The report mentioned Specialist Rostova's presence in the sector as a coincidental variable and commended her for surviving the event. No one wanted to admit the truth. No one wanted to put into official record that the station's half-billion credit defense network, the pride of the Praxian Engineering Corps, had utterly failed. No one wanted to admit that salvation had come not from phase pulse carbines or hard light barriers, but from the quick thinking of a single, suboptimal primate and a piece of discarded rust-covered iron. Cathar avoided my gaze for an entire week. When he finally did speak to me about it, it was in hushed, reverent tones. "Her mind, Commander," he had whispered, his mandibles trembling slightly. "It does not move in straight lines like ours. It sees corners and levers." He never mocked the human again. In fact, he took to giving her a wide berth in the corridors, his posture one of respectful deference. I, of course, took immediate action. I had Specialist Rostova transferred from the ignominy of sub-level 12. I reassigned her to my personal command staff. She now occupies the tactical station directly to my right, a position previously held by a decorated Praxian veteran. She sits there now, monitoring the same galactic traffic she did before, but her presence has changed the very atmosphere of the command deck. She brought her worn satchel with her. It sits on the deck beside her chair. It is an object of intense curiosity and profound dread among my subordinates. They no longer see a collection of junk. They see a puzzle box of potential lethality. They glance at the multi-tool, the binding strips, the filtration straw, and their sensory organs twitch with a new, deeply ingrained wariness. They are no longer artifacts for a museum. They are the components of some unknowable, chaotic equation that could at any moment be solved to their detriment. The rusty pipe, rusty, was logged as evidence and then quietly lost from the impound locker. Rostova had simply shrugged when I told her. "Plenty more where that came from," she'd said. A statement I found more threatening than any declaration of war. I began to study her, obsessed with understanding the variable that had shattered my worldview. I reviewed the recording of her fight with the Scourge Warrior hundreds of times. I slowed it down, analyzed it frame by frame. The brutal efficiency was undeniable, but it was the small things that terrified me. The way she tested her footing before committing to a swing. The way her eyes flickered to a leaking conduit above the Scourge, assessing it as a potential distraction or hazard. The way she used her weaker arm to brace the pipe, a detail my analysis showed perfectly distributed the impact shock, preventing her own bones from shattering. This wasn't combat training as we knew it. This was a deep cellular level instinct, an instinct forged on a world where I was now beginning to truly comprehend everything was a potential weapon and everything was a potential threat. A world where survival depended not on the tool in your hand, but on the mind's ability to see a tool in everything. We Praxians were strong because our world was stable. Humans, it seemed, were dangerous because theirs was not. One shift, during a long and quiet period of monitoring, I found the courage to address the question that had been plaguing my thoughts, a question that felt more important than any tactical consideration. The command deck was quiet, the only sounds the soft hum of the life support and the distant electronic chime of a long-range sensor sweep. The star-dusted void turned with hypnotic slowness outside the main viewport. "Rostova," I began, my voice modulator failing to conceal the hesitance in my tone. "Your equipment. The pipe." She swiveled in her chair, turning away from her console to face me. That smile, the one I now understood all too well, played on her lips. It was not predatory. It was patient. The smile of an instructor waiting for the student to finally ask the right question. "What about it, Commander?" "It was unconventional," I stated, the word feeling laughably inadequate. "It was not a weapon. It was not designed for combat. It should not have been effective." She leaned back, the casual posture of a creature completely at ease in the heart of a billion-credit war machine, surrounded by beings 4 times her size. "Commander Zorgon," she said, and her voice lost its light, conversational edge. It became deeper, imbued with a kind of profound ancient seriousness. "On my world, there's a saying. Any tool is a weapon if you hold it right. Another one, the best tool for the job is the one you have. Your problem, the Praxian problem, is that you think your gear is the weapon." She gestured with a flick of her eyes toward the Clithian guard by the door, his hand resting on the grip of his new, fully charged phase carbine. "You think the rifle is the weapon. You think the armor is the strength. You think the shield is the defense." Then she did something that froze the very marrow in my bones. She slowly, deliberately lifted one hand and tapped her own temple with a single, slender finger. "You're wrong," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it echoed in the vast chamber like a thunderclap. "This is the weapon." She tapped her temple again. "This is the armor. This is the shield. The gear," she gestured to her worn satchel on the floor, "is just what it holds at the moment." And in that instant, with the light of a distant nebula painting her face in hues of blue and violet, I finally, utterly understood. The Praxian Empire, the Clithian Dominion, the whole galactic alliance, we had spent millennia perfecting our technology. We had outsourced our survival to our tools. We built shells of chitin and steel and energy around ourselves, and in doing so, our core, the mind itself, had become rigid, dependent, weak. We saw a pipe and could conceive of it only as a conduit for fluid. She saw a pipe and saw a lever, a club, a pivot, a key. The elites of the galaxy had mocked her primitive gear, but we were the ones who were primitive. Our most crucial instrument had been allowed to rust. Hers was a blade, honed to a razor's edge on the brutal, unforgiving whetstone of a world called Earth. I, Commander Zorgan, Chief of Security for Epsilon 7, finally understood the nature of the human death world. It was not just a planet, it was a crucible, and it did not forge weapons of metal and energy. It forged minds. Minds that could look at the refuse of a forgotten level and find the means to save a star station. And as I looked at this small, soft-skinned primate, I was filled with a new and profound sense of terror, a terror far deeper than any scourge could inspire. What other primitive gear did humanity have waiting in its toolkit? What other common, overlooked objects could they turn into instruments of impossible victory or unspeakable destruction? We had invited a single human onto our station as a gesture of political goodwill. I now believe we may have just invited in the future apex predator of the galaxy. And she had started by teaching us a lesson with a rusty pipe.